You're watching the SegPay News Network. Today we're talking with Bart Shipkovsky from Chargeback Help. Hi everybody, it's Mark Pettit in the SegPay studio here in the United States. As we've reported on a lot of occasion, online merchants, especially in the high-risk space, have to constantly be on guard for changes in regulations, compliance, and with the card scheme brands. And we have a big one to talk about this week. It's called VAMP. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. It's coming from Visa, but we are very fortunate to have an expert on the subject today. Joining us all the way from Warsaw, Poland, please welcome Bart Shipkovsky to the program. Bart is Chief Revenue Officer and Global Head of Sales at Chargeback Help. Bart, thank you for joining us, and you win the prize for the guest joining us from the farthest location, Warsaw, Poland. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you, Mark, for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'd much rather take that prize than the expert on VAMP, but I'm happy to share any knowledge I have.
All right, so Bart, let's start with Chargeback Help. Let's talk about what you guys do, and then let's talk about how you partner with SegPay to help our merchants.
Of course. So Chargeback Help is the industry-leading consolidator of dispute and chargeback removal and prevention tools. We work very closely with the card schemes like Visa and MasterCard, American Express, and Discover, as well as with subsidiaries such as Ethica or Verify, to consolidate and automate all the different tools that they have in the ecosystem to try to deflect as many disputes as possible, to try to prevent as many chargebacks as possible through resolution, through refunds, and to be able to automate representments or fighting of the chargeback for many merchants, acquirers, and ISOs. And I think the latter part to your question, Mark, how do we work with SegPay? So SegPay leverages currently the tool set that we call Resolve for the purpose of protecting its merchants from the negative consequences of chargebacks and getting rid of some of the cardholder friction and issuer friction related to disputes in the ecosystem.
Just a warning to our viewers, we're going to be talking about a lot of acronyms today, a lot of technical terms that Bart will make easy for us to understand. Bart, let's start with the big one, which is VAMP from Visa. Can you tell us what VAMP means to online merchants?
So VAMP is the acquire program that Visa has implemented for monitoring chargebacks and disputes across the ecosystem. So Visa used to have, and I'm going to spare you the acronyms, but Visa used to have a chargeback monitoring program and a fraud monitoring program in the past. And what they have done with VAMP is really tried to narrow their focus on cardholder friction and the removal of fraud out of the ecosystem, and combine this fraud monitoring program and dispute monitoring program into one single consolidated plan or program for acquirers and merchants to adhere to. And that's where they created this Visa Acquire Monitoring Program that looks at chargebacks, looks at fraud, and gives us the overall state of things for where the acquirer and where the merchant sits.
And Bart, VAMP was technically introduced back in the spring and became really newsworthy around June, I believe. But Visa has pushed things back. What's happened with the program since it was announced, and why has it been pushed back to compliance starting this week?
Yeah, good call, Mark. There's been a number of changes, right? So Visa has announced this program initially early last year to be released in April this year. But you're right, there's been a number of changes throughout its course to finally start the consequences, meaning the fees, on October 1st.
Bart, chargebacks have been a term in this industry for years. I remember Kathy Beardsley, the CEO of SegPay, and I were talking that chargebacks back in the day could go as high as 10%. Do you remember those days?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the industry, right? So chargebacks and fraud can be even higher than 10% across certain industries, right? And I think what's important, and as we converse today, I'd like to narrow down on is how many of those chargebacks and fraud are real cases of disputes versus cardholder abuse or what we commonly know as first party or friendly fraud in the ecosystem. Because I think that's one major oversight, I would say, that wasn't really accounted for in this VAMP program.
And Bart, I think I saw in one of your presentations that a chargeback or a dispute can cost a merchant 3 or 4 times what the initial sale could have been, right? So this is a serious issue, and too much and you could be fined and even your business shut down, correct? So this is a serious issue. Let's talk about merchant identifications and how this affects who. For example, SegPay technically has a lot of merchants underneath it. Does SegPay get dinged for all of its merchants? How does it work in that sphere?
Yeah, so it depends on the setup, right? So the VAMP program itself monitors two entities. It monitors the acquirer and it monitors the merchants. The acquirer it monitors on a per acquire bin basis. So it'll look at the whole bin of an acquirer, and certain acquirers may have multiple bins, and it'll see the overall state of disputes against the total volume of settled transactions against the acquirer and place them somewhere on that VAMP spectrum. And then in addition to that, VAMP or Visa through VAMP will also look at each merchant, and it does that by looking on the billing descriptors of the merchant, so that text that appears on a bank statement, and it'll identify that merchant again as being above or below the required thresholds. So there are also entities such as payment facilitators or aggregators or merchant of records in the ecosystem. Those in this scenario would qualify as or would be referred to as a merchant. Anything I say against the merchant would also account towards an MOR.
So it's very important for SegPay to help its merchants underneath be compliant, right, and meet these ratios. So again, we talked about a huge number, 10%. That number of chargeback and disputes is way down now. I believe it's 0.50. Is that correct?
I would say it's even lower than that. So Europe as a region is actually the lowest, but it's well below 0.2. So it's very, very low. And I would deem that to the great tools that are out there, such as Ethica and Verify, which have been able to provide merchants the ability to resolve through a refund these chargebacks before they need to be filed as a chargeback in the card scheme ecosystem. The bigger challenge that we have today is the reported fraud, which there's much less tools to be able to protect against.
So Bart, for our viewers who may not be in the weeds on the technical terms, let's talk about what a chargeback and dispute is. What does that mean in its simplest term?
Of course. So, and I think this is an interesting nuance. So the card schemes created a dispute mechanism, which is commonly known as a chargeback, which is effectively the cardholder speaking to the bank that issued them the card, flagging a transaction as a dispute. Commonly, there are two types of disputes. There's cardholder service types of disputes, and there's fraud-related disputes. A fraud would be the cardholder saying, I didn't do this transaction. Someone got a hold of my card details. Maybe the merchant charged me without my permission. Whereas cardholder dispute would be, yes, I made this transaction, but I didn't get the service that was described, or maybe it never arrived, right? So once I have that conversation with my card issuing bank, they would file the dispute into one of the card schemes, whereby the card scheme would then present this dispute in the form of a chargeback to the merchant acquiring bank, who would eventually present it to the merchant for the ability for the merchant either to accept responsibility and refund back the money back to the issuer and to the cardholder, or to contest it through the means of what's called a representment by providing compelling evidence documentation to say, no, I did do right by the cardholder or the issuer is incorrect in this manner. So it's a dispute mechanism, communication mechanism between the issuer and the acquiring bank.
Thanks for making that simple for us to understand. I appreciate that. But Chargeback Help has specific tools to help identify what is what, right? And keep this from escalating. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. So, there are many tools out there, and one of the beauties of what we try to do is we try to make sure that the merchant or the acquiring bank can focus on their business and not have to get into the weeds of exactly all the different threats and how to protect against them, right? So what Chargeback Help does is we categorize all of the different tools into three simple categories. The first category we call Deflect. And in this category, you have tools such as Order Insight or Consumer Clarity or Compelling Evidence 3.0. But the overall purpose of all these tools is to be able to, in real time, upon cardholder request or inquiry, to get the data from the merchant's CRM or backend, such as the full receipt of what was bought, who was the merchant, the website where I bought something, and deliver that to the card issuing bank and the cardholder right upon the inquiry, so they can have a clear picture of exactly what they bought and from whom, and hopefully resolve any cases of simple cardholder confusion, descriptor confusion, or purchase confusion, and get rid of those disputes out of the ecosystem, right? So in that scenario, there is no fraud filed against the acquirer or the merchant, there is no chargeback filed, the transaction was clarified, and there is no need for a refund. So it's resolved in the most optimal manner for the cardholder and also for the merchant. The second suite of solutions we have, we call resolve. In this case, a dispute is imminent. A chargeback is definitely coming. The data provided was not enough. So here we have alerting solutions such as RDR or Ethica alerts or CDRN, the purpose of which is notifying the merchant early about a confirmed case of a dispute, typically within a few hours or a couple of days of the authorization taking place, so that the merchant can take preventative actions such as stopping shipment of goods, canceling of services, blocking of accounts to prevent further fraud losses. And then on top of that, the merchant can simply make a refund against the transaction, send the notification about the refund to the card issuing bank through the rails of one of these alerting services, and by doing so, resolve the dispute without a need for the issuer to proceed to filing a chargeback with the card schemes. So that unfortunately doesn't mean the merchant gets to keep their money. They still have to make a refund. However, it prevents additional losses related to fraud because of the speed of data, and it prevents the negative consequences and fines related to chargebacks. And then the last suite that we have is the recover suite, which we talked about, which is the representment suite, which is simply a matter of, I received the chargeback already. I would like to use the compelling evidence in my CRM for you, Chargeback Help, to automatically file the case and try to dispute it and fight it, because I believe I'm in the right as a merchant, and I would like to make sure I keep the revenue.
And Bart, as far as SegPay, is this baked into the services that SegPay offer? Is it an add-on to what SegPay offers the merchant? How does it work in that regard?
Yeah, so we're working very closely with SegPay to expand the functionality that they're able to offer to their merchants. So what they've done at the moment is really focused on the biggest impact solutions, which were the alerting solutions, which allow the merchants to lower their chargeback ratios to some of the stats that you've quoted, right? To be able to prevent, resolve all of those, and get rid of the associated chargebacks. So that's what we have today, which we fully automated and created rule-based mechanisms to be able to protect the merchants and allow them to use those tools to their advantage. Further in the future, we're planning on scaling out into the Deflect segment and being able to provide digital receipts and deflecting some of the first-party fraud solutions as well. But given that that's a heavier integration, we haven't quite finalized that yet.
All right, let's talk about those alerts. There's a TC40 and a TC15, correct? Can you explain what each of those means and how they're different?
TC40, TC15, those are specific files within the Visa ecosystem that only pertain to Visa transactions. There's also TC05, so let's start there. Every single settled transaction gets reported into a file that Visa has that's called the TC05. So that's a total accountment of every settled transaction. Then every reported fraud, so every time a consumer tells a card issuing bank, I didn't make this transaction, it was not me, someone fraudulently got a hold of my card details, that gets reported into the TC40, which is the fraud file that Visa holds. And then if the card issuing bank decides to progress and actually file that as a chargeback into the Visa realm, then that becomes a TC15, which is a reported chargeback, right? So it's important that TC40, the reported fraud, is not one-to-one with the TC15, the reported chargebacks.
How do the merchants keep up with this? Is there a dashboard? How do they get their information? And is it difficult for them to track these alerts?
Well, if you figure that out, let me know, because I think there's a big business model here to be had. Well, what I would say, Mark, is unfortunately, as you can imagine, a lot of these banks are very large organizations that have a lot on their roadmap and are not necessarily so nimble as to create something day one. So as bad as it sounds, many merchants are unfortunately left without a solution there and are having to rely on either companies such as SegPay to try to create these solutions in their behalf and protect them, or having to rely simply on acquirers notifying them when it's a little bit too late and telling them you're above the ratio, now you have to face the consequences, right?
Wow.
So there are some tools that Chargeback Help provides. So for example, we do have the ability to obtain the TC40 and the TC15 files, which are needed for that VAMP calculation, directly from Visa for the merchant. So we do have that functionality kind of built in on our side as well.
So let's talk about the magic date. It's October 1st, right? This is when compliance starts. Is there any grace period? How does it work from here, Bart?
Yeah, so this is one of the magic dates that Visa has been sure to create many of them. July 1st was when the 3 months grace period started. So let's define that as well. Within every 12-month period, Visa has advised that every merchant and acquirer will have a 3-month grace period, within which, if they're above the ratios, they will not be fined, as long as they come back down below the designated VAMP ratio before that 3-month grace period is over. That 3-month grace period renews itself every 12 months. So you're only allowed such a grace period once in every 12 months. July 1st was when that grace period started for merchants and acquirers. We had July, August, and September. And then October 1st, the first fines will start for any merchants that have exceeded that ratio, have not come down in the last 3 months. Now, there are 3 different segments to the VAMP allowed ratios. You have the early warning stage, you have the above standard stage, and then you have the excessive stage. The stage that's kicking in October 1st is only the excessive stage for the merchant and for the acquirer. The above standard stage will actually kick in January 1st next year. So we do have a little bit more time on the less excessive merchants and acquirers.
Let's talk about the fines, Bart. How significant are they?
They can be very significant. The way and we haven't talked about the calculation. The calculation itself for VAMP is the total number of your reported fraud. So this was that TC40 file we spoke about, plus the total number of your reported disputes, which is that TC15 file we talked about. From that total, you subtract any Visa exemptions. And we divide that up by the total number of settled transactions, which are held in that TC05 file. So for the acquirer, the excessive ratio has been defined as being above 70 basis points, which effectively means 0.7%. That's where you will be billed as an acquirer an $8 fee for every single TC40 reported fraud and every single TC15 reported dispute. So yes, those fines can be very significant.
Wow, so $8 each, basically, right?
Absolutely, especially since on a fraud-related dispute, you get 2 hits because you get hit on the reported fraud, the TC40, and you get the chargeback, you get hit on the chargeback. So that could be $16 just on the new fee.
All right, Bart, let's get very specific for merchants. What can they do? How can they work with SegPay? How can they work with Chargeback Help to navigate this?
Yeah, so on the chargeback front, the solutions are so advanced as long as you use them in collaboration, right? Through Chargeback Help, we can consolidate all of them and automate all of them for you. But solutions such as Ethica Alerts, Visa, RDR, and CDRN are developed enough at this stage that you can really get rid of most, if not all, of your chargebacks. We have merchants, for example, in the subscription space, able to claim about a 20 to 25% reduction of fraud by using these solutions, of reported fraud, right? Which is significant. But it's nowhere close to 100%. There's all sorts of different tools to be able to leverage. There's no one silver bullet, I would say.
So, Bart, just 2 final questions. One, do you expect further charges with the VAMP program? And finally, do you expect MasterCard to follow suit? What's in the future here?
Well, one of the things that merchants have to be aware of is within the VAMP program, there is a merchant excessive threshold as well, right? And at the moment for this year, it's a merchant cannot exceed 2.2% VAMP ratio. At the moment, Visa has only posted the fines. Visa has not yet said what and after what period of time they will do if someone's continuously breaching, right? A fine may be just that. Someone may be willing to pay it. But if we're continuously breaching that threshold for consecutive 3, 4, 6 months, it could be likely that Visa might reach out to that acquirer or that merchant and force a more aggressive action of maybe a mid-termination or something more, right? So we should be cognizant of that. MasterCard has made it clear that they do not currently have plans to create a similar consolidated programs anytime in the near future. They do have plans to update their existing fraud and dispute monitoring programs as they are, but it is not going to be anything, at least not short-term, anything as drastic as an overhaul of the programs altogether.
All right, Bart, anything we've missed or any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think one of the things we didn't mention, just because you as a merchant may not be reached out to by Visa through the acquirer because of breaching, it doesn't mean that you're not dragging the acquirer's ratios up and the acquirer doesn't get in trouble. So it may still mean that there's going to be a consequence of the acquirer reaching out to you and requesting you to take some action, right? I think we're all in this together, Mark. I think it's really important we keep talking about it.
Excellent. Bart Shipkovsky from Chargeback Help, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're a SegPay merchant and have questions still, reach out to your account manager. And if you need more information and you're not a SegPay customer, reach out to sales@segpay.com. We'll continue to following breaking news like this right here on the SegPay News Network.